Bob, merci beaucoup d'être avec moi ici à Paris. Je suis un grand fan de ton travail, donc c'est un vrai honneur d'être avec toi ici aujourd'hui. Tu m'as même beaucoup inspiré dans mes débuts. Moi et aussi toutes les personnes de ma communauté qui me suivent, la communauté Devenir Ingeson. On a beaucoup d'ingénieurs du son de divers horizons que tu as beaucoup inspiré aussi. Donc c'est un vrai plaisir d'être là. J'ai quelques questions donc, pour toi aujourd'hui. Est-ce que tu peux nous raconter un petit peu comment tu as démarré dans le métier, comment ta carrière a démarré en fait, voilà le commencement quoi.
How I got into it in the beginning? Well, I was a sort of a musician, not a great musician at all, but when I was a teenager, I was a bass player in a rock band, and it's mostly sort of we played parties in some bars, and the last band I was in was doing a demo in a recording studio in New York, and I was always the guy in the band recording the gigs and the rehearsals, and I was sort of more into the recording side as much as the musician part of it, and I had a bit of stage fright as well. I didn't really like being on stage or being in the spotlight. I didn't care for that part of it, and so the first time I walked into a professional recording studio in New York, it was called Media Sound. To do this demo, I thought, oh, well, I could just live in this place, and I'm still living in I have one in my house. And so we did this demo, and the band split up, and I made friends with the people in the recording studio and talked them into hiring me. And so they said, yeah, sure. They didn't have any room for me at the time, but they said, okay, it was summer, come back at the end of the summer and the interns will be leaving, and maybe you can be hired as a delivery boy. Okay. I thought, fine. And so I showed up in September, and I reported to the shipping department, and they sent me out on a delivery, and when I came back, they were looking for me. The receptionist said, are you that Clearmountain kid? I said, yeah. Oh, boy, you better get upstairs. They're looking for you in the office. And I thought I was in trouble. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to be fired my first day. And they said, oh, well, we don't need a delivery boy. We need an assistant engineer. Get down to Studio A. So the first, I went into Studio A. And so the first session, my first day at work, was with Duke Ellington.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I know.
The
first day, and I had never. I was 19 years old. I had never even met someone famous before in my life, from Connecticut, and so that was pretty amazing. And then it just went on from there, and I picked it up really quickly, and then I became the guy in the studio that other engineers and assistants asked for advice. Like after 6 months, and people were asking me about the equipment, and I just picked it up so fast. And then the first session I did was after a few months. Sorry, I was booked on a session with a band called Kool and the Gang. You familiar with Kool and the Gang?
Oui, bien sûr.
Yeah, and the engineer was he was one of the day engineers, and he liked to doing advertising jingles and things like that. He didn't like doing records.
Oh, okay.
And it was at night, and he was tired, and he just wanted to read he read his newspaper and said, here, you do the session.
Okay.
D'accord.
And I never even sat down in front of the desk.
Pourquoi pas?
Right? I was like, really? I said, look, I don't know how to do. He said, you'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. Like, okay. And it went well, and I mixed 2 songs, and then they came back 6 months later. And once again, I was booked out on one of their sessions as an assistant, and the engineer didn't even show up that time. And so I did the whole session. I recorded 2 songs, and there were 2 of their hits. There was a song called Funky Stuff, which was got into the 40s, I think, on the Billboard charts, and then Hollywood Swingin', which got up to like number 6 on the Billboard chart. And so They still didn't know who I was, though. I was just the assistant engineer.
Okay.
D'accord.
And after that, what made you start to be,
Et après ça, à quel moment tu as commencé à te spécialiser dans le mixage?
for a lot of people in the industry,
Parce que pour beaucoup de gens dans le métier, tu es la personne qui a
you are the
inventé le
guys
mixage.
who invented the mix. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a funny thing because when I first started, I didn't like mixing because it
Oh.
just seemed boring to me, just sitting,
Oh.
by yourself or with the producer. And I really liked the recording part of it,
Okay.
But then once I learned about mixing, that part of it appealed to me more. Plus, when automation started getting good, I realized, because the early days of mixing back then, there was no automation, so you needed other people to help,
Yes.
right?
Eh oui,
So
bien
you were
sûr.
depending on the producer or an assistant or somebody else to
Yes.
get it
Eh oui,
right.
pour t'aider à manipuler.
And you couldn't really, you'd only mix in sections. You would mix, up to the verse, and then you'd have to stop, and then you'd mix from the next chorus, and then so you couldn't really listen to it while you were mixing. And so that, I didn't like that very much, because
Okay.
I like to listen to the song. And then once the automation started to get good, then I could do it all myself, and I could just sit there and I could
Okay.
actually listen to the music while I was mixing.
Okay.
And then it became very appealing to me. And then what happened is I started getting very busy, even though I was still on staff at a studio called Power Station in New York, which I helped build and helped design. But I was still on staff, so people were starting to pay me. They wanted to pay me independently from the studio, which I didn't think was fair. And so I finally found a manager, because I couldn't deal with people calling me all the time. And he said, "Oh, well, you could get a royalty for mixing an album." And that no engineer had ever gotten a royalty for mixing a record before. It was really just producers. And I thought he was crazy. I said, "No, nobody will do that. Nobody will pay a royalty." And sure enough, I was the first one to ever get a royalty.
Okay.
And so it just went on from there, yeah. And then other mixers started to get royalties too.
Et c'est à partir de cette période-là que tu as fait que du mixage?
Mostly mixing, yeah. I produced about 20 or 25 records.
Oh, okay.
And there were very few of them were very successful. There was the Pretenders and Simple Minds and a few other things. Sort of co-produced a live album for Paul McCartney, and that did pretty well. And then, but I didn't really like producing that much, because you were stuck between the artist and the record company, and there was always a lot of psychology involved in getting people to do the right performance. And I was just never very good at that part of it. And I've worked with people that I feel are amazing producers, like Don Was and Tony Berg and some of these other people that are, and I didn't think I was as good as them. And so, it turns out I'm pretty good at mixing. And so, yeah, so I just ended up, that's more fun for me. I just enjoy it a lot more, the mixing part.
So now you mix,
Maintenant, tu mixes essentiellement depuis chez toi, à Los Angeles.
That's right. Yeah,
Ton studio s'appelle Mix This.
mix this, yeah.
And you keep
Et tu as gardé le côté analogique avec ton SSL.
That's right.
Pour toi aujourd'hui, c'est mieux que de mixer dans un ordinateur ou ce genre de choses?
Well, I don't know if it sounds better. I think it sounds better, but that's very debatable.
Yeah,
You know what I
okay.
mean? And so many amazing records nowadays have been done mixing in the box in the computer, and it's just that it's not as much fun for me. I enjoy
yeah.
mixing on. I know it so well that I don't have to think about it. And when I go into the computer, it's just always a lot of thinking, and I got to open up a plugin, and like, how does this plugin work? And it's far more complicated, I think. And no, I'm not that. I don't think my brain doesn't work
okay.
like that way. It just doesn't work that way, And I just enjoy getting up and walking around and turning knobs, and it's just more fun for me, And to me, I don't really do it for the money. I do it because I like mixing. I always have, and ever since I started to like mixing, And if it's not fun, I'm not interested.
Ouais, on a besoin de s'amuser pour faire un
Yeah.
mixage. Et donc aujourd'hui, tu mixes beaucoup en Atmos.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of
Tu as un
Atmos,
setup
yes.
autour donc, des cartes son Symphony
That's right.
d'Apogee. Pour toi, quels sont les avantages de l'Atmos Qu'est-ce que ça représente dans le métier, dans le travail de mixage en tant que tel?
Yeah, it is. Well, for a while, years ago, like 20, 25 years ago, there was a 5-1 surround started, and I started doing that. In fact, my wife Betty said you should be mixing surround.
Okay.
I was like, oh, geez, how do I do that?
Ouais.
And I woke up in the middle of the night one night, and I figured out how I could do it on my SSL. And so I've been doing that ever since. I've been doing, every time I do a stereo mix, I do a 5-1 mix. There's a group called The Band, they were famous back in the 60s. It was a group that I grew up listening to, an American rock band. And I mixed their first 3 albums in stereo, I remixed them in stereo and 5-1 surround. The label asked me to do that. And then the 4th album, which is an album called Cahoots, came up and they said, oh, can you do this one too? But can you do an Atmos mix? Because whenever it was 2 or 3 years ago, the Atmos became a popular thing. And I said, yeah, sure, I can do that. And then I figured out I had to very quickly figure out how to upgrade my room to 12 speakers and Dolby Atmos. I had to figure out how to do that. Luckily, I have a very good assistant that technically helped. Otherwise, I don't know if I could have done it. But and so I started doing that, and ever since then, I've been doing the same thing. Every time I do a stereo mix, I'm also doing an Atmos mix. But of course, now the labels are all they're almost demanding it, really, nowadays.
Donc tu as plus de plaisir à mixer en Atmos qu'en stéréo?
It's really important now. I mean, everybody, they've told us you have to, if you're doing a stereo mix, you have to deliver an Atmos mix, which is why I started using the Apogee Symphony Mark II. And at the time, you could do monitoring, 12-channel monitoring, but that's all it would do. You know, you could use it as your interface for your DAW, but it would also control 12 speakers, but you couldn't get another pair like stereo speakers or anything like that. It would only do the one thing. And so I worked with Apogee to upgrade the software so you could do an Atmos configuration, you could do a 5-1 surround configuration, you could do various sets of stereo speakers, you could have 3 or 4 sets of stereo speakers if you were also doing stereo. And so it's completely versatile. It's 16 different workflows that you can very easily customize. And you don't need any help. Even I can customize it. And I'm not that smart.
J'ai vraiment hâte de voir tout ça en action donc, dans cette démonstration que tu vas nous faire ce week-end. Donc ton approche du mixage en Atmos.
It's really an amazing piece. Not only that, it just sounds so good. I mean, Apogee has a reputation for the best audio quality of any interface, you know.
Peut-être une question sur ton approche du mixage en tant que tel. Tu as fait énormément de mixages durant ta carrière. Comment tu trouves ton inspiration? Comment tu fais pour être si créatif, notamment dans la gestion de tes effets, tes reverbs, tes délais, etc. etc. Comme je te le disais, tu as inspiré énormément d'ingénieurs du son. Comment tu trouves toute cette inspiration? Je veux dire, qu'est-ce qui se passe dans ta tête quand tu mixes en fait?
Well, it's usually whatever music I'm mixing kind of tells me what to do. Okay. You know what I mean? I listen very carefully. I'll usually, if it's something that I don't know, it's usually something that I've never heard before. And I'll listen to the rough mix, or if the artists and producers have done a rough mix, and trying to find out what direction they've gone in. And then I'll just try to figure out where, it's almost like an imaginary stage to me. It's like or a place, like where is this piece of music taking place, you know, and it's usually more of a state of mind. It's not an actual physical thing. And then I'll try to put myself in that that situation and okay, what was the artist thinking about and what were they feeling? And sometimes it's just no effects at all, you know. Sometimes it's just very dry, and sometimes it'll be a big space.
Okay.
I don't know. And I have nowadays I do depend on plugins quite a bit, whereas I have racks of outboard gear, but I use that less and less, you know. I have my own plugins called Clearmountain's Domain, which is mainly
Ils sont géniaux. Moi, je les utilise tout le temps. Ils sont géniaux.
That came up. I should explain how that came up. Was I have a whole up until that point, I had a whole chain of effects that I would use, and there were delays and reverbs. The delays fed into reverbs, into harmonizers, and they would feed into each other, and it was a whole signal chain. And my assistant at the time, who does a lot of mixes in the box, he tried to duplicate that in the computer, and he had a really hard time doing it. And I tried to duplicate it in the computer, and because it's such a complex balance of effects, and so we thought, well, maybe we could do a plugin, because Apogee was starting to get into doing plugins, and they've done some really, you probably know, really very good plugins. And so we spent a couple of years mapping it out and trying to figure out how actually to do it. And so we came up with Clearmountain's Domain, and so now that's become my main effects chain, besides something called Altiverb, which I've been using for years, mainly because they do quad reverbs, which I really like for the Atmos and 451. And so I combine those two quite a bit. Yeah.
Non, c'est vraiment génial. Moi, je les utilise très très souvent et c'est vraiment génial.
Please spread the word, because it seems like we're trying to keep it secret.
Utilisez-les, achetez-les.
Not that many people know.
Voilà, ma dernière question, et là je pense à ma communauté donc, qui me suit. Si tu aurais un conseil à donner pour les gens qui veulent devenir ingénieurs du son aujourd'hui, quel serait-il?
Okay, well, first of all, I don't know how much the music business is rough nowadays. You know, it's very hard to get into you really have to hook up with an artist or a producer. That's probably the best way, because the big studios, there's not that many big studios. The way I started, doesn't really work anymore, I don't think. The advice that I like to give people is if you're going to get into being a recording engineer or pretty much anything, even if you're an artist or a musician, figure out what you're really good at. You know, if you're good at mixing, or if you're good at recording, or if you're good at playing guitar. If you're not good at it, find something else that you are good at, right? Do that. But once you find what you're good at, first of all, hopefully you like whatever that is, right? And if you don't like it, learn how to like it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because if that's what you're good at, that's what you should be doing. And figure out a way that you enjoy it, because you have to enjoy what you're doing, I think, for your career. And basically those two things have to work together. You have to be good at it, and you have to enjoy it.
Avoir du plaisir.
Of course.
Yeah, right. And but like I say, as far as the business itself, there's probably more. I don't know how things are here, but in America, there's probably more work in film and television and things like that. You know, especially television. There's so many.
Ouais, c'est un petit peu la même chose ici aussi en France.
There's so many channels now. You know, there's so much with streaming that you might be better in that area, you know. I don't know. You know, if you can hook up with a good artist, then that's great too. But it's difficult.
It's very difficult.
Bob, merci infiniment pour ce moment passé avec toi. Merci
Yeah,
à
thanks,
Jeff de
Jeff.
Mogar Audio d'avoir organisé cette interview. Je
was
suis
a
vraiment
pleasure
très
meeting you
très
as
heureux
well.
d'avoir passé ce moment-là avec toi.
Thank you so
Euh,
much. See you
On se
Sunday,
voit ce
28th.
week-end
Yeah.
donc pour cette démonstration
Oui,
qu'on
c'est
organise
bon.
avec notre association. Donc on
Yeah.
verra ton approche du mixage en Atmos. Prends soin de toi et à bientôt.
My pleasure. Yeah, and see you soon too. Thank you very much for asking me to do this interview.
Ah ben avec un immense plaisir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
And
Merci,
regards
Bob.
to all your listeners.
Ah super, merci.